All right. Well, welcome everybody. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're calling in from. I guess most of you are probably from this area, but it'll be fun to see if anybody's from further away than the DMV. And make a note if you've ever served as a poll worker or an election observer. We all know our democracy works best when everyone participates. So a special shout out and thank you to those who go that extra step and help get out in the polls. I know you're all working to make sure that everyone you know is registered to vote. I'm Kathy Chiron, the newest member of the CWI board, and very happy to introduce our program and speakers, all of whom go the extra step when it comes to creating a robust democracy. I'll let you read more complete bios because, quite frankly, if I told you their whole story and all about their experience of publications, we might not have enough time to really spend and learn with them. We're going to do our best to keep this program to just 1 hour. Everybody can get back to work, all that get out the vote work, as well as whatever other avenues we're pursuing. Our speakers all hail from, not all, I'm sorry, our speakers hail from the Brennan Center and the Center for American Progress. These two organizations, like the Clearinghouse on Women's Issues, are nonpartisan. We don't support, endorse, or oppose any political party or candidate, but we all can and certainly do take positions on issues. We all speak up to strengthen our democracy and encourage active participation in all aspects of that democracy. Please put your questions in the chat. Jan Erickson, our CWI co-president, will watch for them and facilitate the Q&A after our three guests have enlightened us with insights on how we might counteract the stumbling blocks we are facing in this current election cycle. I'm going to also remind everybody to put yourself on mute so that when your phone rings and you start typing, we won't hear the clickety-click or the phones. Alice Clapman is Senior Counsel in the Brennan Center's Voting Rights Program. Liz Howard is the Director of Partner Engagement for the Brennan Center Election and Government Program. If you want to know the good, the bad, the ugly of elections, these two remarkable women are the go-to folks at the Brennan Center. Colin Seeberger is the Senior Advisor for Communications at the Center for American Progress. If you want to get a handle on Project 2025, to drill down on what's really in it and how to talk to people about that, Colin's your man. So over to you, Alice. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thanks for having me. What I'm going to do with my time today is do a little bit of kind of history, recent history of what states have done since 2020 to strengthen their election systems, and a little bit about what the federal government has done too. So in 2020, as you don't need me to tell you, we saw a very broad effort by supporters of a losing presidential candidate to overturn the election results. It involved participants at every level of government, local, state, and federal, officials and lawmakers, and even in some cases, judges. It was a close call. And it was a massive reality check about some of the pressure points in our election systems. They're very decentralized, right, with only limited federal oversight. And they rely to a bigger degree than I think we realized on norms. The norm that local officials certify valid results, even if they don't like them or don't like their state's election policies on drop boxes or absentee voting. We rely on the norm that disputes about the validity of election results are channeled through the courts and not fought out in state legislatures or on the street or in vote counting centers. And we rely on the norm that Congress will honor the results as certified at the state level. As you know, these norms were seriously challenged in 2020, and that's prompted a spate of efforts to try to harden norms into clear legal protections so that we don't repeat history. And we have made a lot of progress. So most notably at the federal level, Congress passed the Electoral Count Reform Act, which closed some loopholes and resolved some ambiguities that had been exploited in 2020. So most importantly, what that act did was clarify that it is state governors or other executives who certify election results to Congress, so not state legislatures. That law barred state legislatures from changing the rules after Election Day. You probably all remember some of the effort to do that in 2020. And the Electoral Count Reform Act also makes it harder for federal legislators to overturn election results. This was a necessary fix, but somewhat minimal. As you can imagine, that's what Congress was capable of doing. Several states have gone further, strengthening their laws and protecting the certification process. And just to level set about what I mean when I use that term, certification process, I'm referring to the legal process by which officials sign off on the completion of election results. So these processes vary depending on the type of race we're talking about. But in a presidential election, that means local officials are signing off on local results, sending them up to state officials who then aggregate those results so that the governor or other executive can certify a presidential winner. So that's what I mean by certification. And states have taken a number of measures to make that process smoother after 2020. So some states have made it more clear that the role that local officials play in this is limited. They are overseeing the process. It's not a license to second guess results in neighboring counties or state policies. It's not a protest vote, for example. So states like Minnesota and Michigan put that into either their constitution or their state laws. In Arizona, the Secretary of State put that protection into the election procedures manual. In Colorado, they put in place a number of reforms to try to fireproof their system. So for example, sometimes there are glitches in the canvassing process. So what Colorado did was spell out exactly what do you do when there's a problem with election administration and who should be involved in solving it. In other words, the experts and not partisans. In Michigan and Colorado, the law has been changed to empower state level officials to step in when the locals are obstructing the process. States have also tried to like in Michigan, try to keep the legislature out of the process too. Another piece of this that has become more and more important, especially since Congress passed the Electoral Count Reform Act, which created a new federal deadline for states to certify results, which this year is December 11th. States have done some work to try to make sure that they're going to wrap up their results in time for that. So that's a matter of making sure their timing for certification, for court disputes, for recounts, for all of that is keyed so that they can finish that process before December 11th. So a number of states have adjusted their timeline. Arizona was able to do that in a bipartisan effort pretty recently. And then other actors are trying to do that as well. So like in Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court tightened their election litigation deadlines so that they're trying to keep people from being able to obstruct this process simply through delay. So as you can see, a lot of progress is being made. I'm sure you're all following the news, and you know that in some places like Georgia, we are backsliding on this certification issue. And so, 2024 is going to be another test case on this. Another problem that has existed for a long time, but got worse around the 2020 election with increased absentee voting because of COVID, and then the backlash against that is large-scale efforts to try to get absentee ballots thrown out. We really saw a lot of that in 2020. And states have taken notice of this and tried to put in place some protections to make that less likely. So you're going to see I'm lifting up Michigan a lot in this story because they really are kind of the gold standard for improving their state election systems. And that was a voter effort, a really heroic citizen-led effort to change their constitution. But not just Michigan, Nevada too, put some protections in place on absentee voting to make sure that ballots aren't thrown out for minor signature discrepancies. Minnesota noticed that ballots were being thrown out if people return them without a privacy sleeve. So they fixed that in their law to just, again, protect voters and reduce chances for gamesmanship. And some states, like, again, Michigan and Maryland, have made it easier for voters to cure problems with their absentee ballots. So that's a matter of both making sure that these problems are flagged early in the process with, pre-processing before Election Day, and then also making sure that voters get notice of the problem and a real chance to fix it. States have passed stronger anti-intimidation measures since 2020 to protect both voters and election workers. So, of course, there are federal voter intimidation protections in the law, but it can be hard to get those protections uniformly enforced against every instance of the problem. So it's really important that states play a role in that too. And since 2020, at least 8 states have strengthened their legal protections against voter intimidation. A few have put that into their constitution, Michigan and Nevada, reinforcing how critical that is. At least 6 states passed laws banning guns from polling places, and a 7th state has passed that, and it's sitting on the governor's desk in California. 17 states plus DC have enacted protections specifically for election officials and election workers to protect them from threats, intimidation, doxing, meaning people putting their personal information, for example, online to harass them. These states have put in place protections against interference by outsiders. And it's also worth noting that the Department of Justice has really been, working on this problem too. They've put out guidance, and they have very vigorously prosecuted some examples of people threatening election officials. States have increased election security. So, and again, lifting up Michigan and sort of the power of direct democracy and ballot initiatives, they put specific election security measures into their constitution because they thought they were so important. Imagine if we could do that at the federal level, like really laying out the way things should be. So they put in their constitution public election audits, making sure the process is only under the Secretary of State's supervision. It's the political parties aren't involved. Prohibiting anyone from changing the policies and procedures mid-process after Election Day, making sure everyone knows what the rules are in advance. Again, to lift up the feds, the Department of Homeland Security has recently increased funding for election security, recognizing how important it is. Much of the fight to protect our elections is a battle against disinformation. We all know this, that false narratives of election fraud are providing cover for efforts to obstruct elections and generally just corroding public trust in elections and in the government. So it is really a critical problem, and states have recognized that. Particularly state officials have a number of very innovative strategies in place to preempt and combat disinformation. And, civil society and election experts are helping with that effort. But what we're seeing is more and more state officials are using every avenue they have, every form of media, whether it's Twitter or X, whatever we call it, live demonstrations, videos, written materials, to explain to voters what protections are in place to make sure elections are safe and accurate. Because it turns out people really don't know what state officials do and all the checks there are in the system to make it work. So they don't know about all the testing that is done, for example, for ballot tabulators. that there are bipartisan poll worker teams who ensure, chain of custody for ballots, that there are post-election audits. All of these safeguards, it's really critical that we all help election officials lift that up to the public to increase public trust in our elections. Some states have taken some other measures to try to combat disinformation. Minnesota has done something particularly innovative where they allow affected individuals, private individuals, to bring suit against election disinformation and try to get, for example, an injunction to stop it or damages. A lot of states, or several states, I should say, a lot might be an exaggeration, have passed new laws banning or restricting deepfakes and other deceptive media. And that's interestingly an innovation that we've seen across the political spectrum. States recognizing that AI poses new challenges and that policymakers have to address those head on and early. So that's a little bit of sort of the good news. I will, before I turn over the floor, I will highlight some challenges that remain, some of the many challenges that remain. Election officials have suffered massive turnover and lost expertise since 2020, and they're operating under enormous stress. A barrage of records requests that come in endlessly, voter challenges, challenges to every aspect of the process at board meetings and such, and just a general level of second guessing and harassment that is, really something new in terms of the severity of it. So we have newer election officials and poll workers coming in to administer this very high stakes election under a lot of pressure. The misinformation and disinformation environment is increasingly more challenging with technological advances like AI, and an ever more fractured and polarized media environment. So this has raised the risk that minor glitches in election administration will be blown out of proportion and used to undermine faith in elections and challenge the results of our election. The new deadlines that the federal government has put in place that I mentioned with the Electoral Count Reform Act, those are, great in theory, but this will be a test case of whether states have their ducks in a row to meet those deadlines, and specifically the December 11th deadline for state governors or executives to certify their results. And then lastly, as a challenge, I will flag that there is a rash of litigation kicking around state and federal courts by election deniers challenging every aspect of election administration, and these cases just haven't been resolved yet. So we need to see how they will play out. But these, litigants are trying to meddle with notice and cure processes for absentee ballots. They are trying to force election officials to purge voter rolls, even though, I'm sure well that that national law prohibits mass purges within 90 days of an election, but people are still trying to do that through the courts. And we know a huge challenge is just the general ongoing effort to sow doubt about our elections and set the stage for challenging the results after November. So with that small set of bad news, I will turn over the floor. And I'm not sure if my colleague Liz is on or if we're going straight to Colin.
I'm happy to hop in if we're waiting on Liz.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
I don't see Liz on the participant list. So Colin, go for it.
Okay. All right. Well, you may have heard about this thing called Project 2025. It's been in the news a little bit over the course of the past few months, which really reflects just the dramatic changing landscape that we have seen as it relates to the policy agenda of a potential right-wing administration. compared to what we saw back in May. We went into the field back in May and saw that just about 12% of Americans had ever really heard of Project 2025. Now that number across a range of different surveys is up to about 75%. And Project 2025 is about 50 points underwater in terms of favorability. And so people have, kind of started to sink their teeth into this. But as I'll touch on in just a minute, it's really complex. It's overwhelming. It's over 900 pages. It's got a bunch of different moving pieces and different parts. And there's also been an effort to try to distance Donald Trump from this effort, even as more than 80% of the people who are working on it have direct ties to the former president. You can go to the next slide, please. So like I mentioned, Project 2025 is an effort that's been cooked up by the Heritage Foundation in partnership with more than 110 far-right policy groups. Together, they have come up with a plan to completely overhaul and take over the federal government. Their key objective is really consolidating power in not just the executive branch, but the president himself or herself. And they've got a bunch of different parts. So it's not just a policy mandate that they've worked up. It's more than 920 pages, affects every major federal agency. They've also got a personnel recruitment project that they are leading because part of their program is to replace tens of thousands of career civil servants that work in the federal government and replace them with political loyalists who would put fidelity to, in this case, Donald Trump and his MAGA ideology over the public interest. They've also got a training center for these folks that they're identifying to fill these roles, where they are training them on how to basically navigate the bureaucracy internally and enter the federal government, as Kevin Roberts has described, who's the head of the Heritage Foundation, as weaponized conservatives. Finally, they've also got a 180-day playbook for the first, basically half of the first year of president's term, which they refuse to make public, despite the fact that multiple members of Congress have called on them to demand its release. If Project 2025, the thing that they've, put on the website is 50 points underwater, really scary, a kind of wholesale attack on the middle class and Americans' rights and freedoms is what they're putting online. Just imagine what they're sharing in private. Next slide, please. But it's really important for us to think about Project 2025 not just as like another policy agenda from a think tank in Washington. We've never really seen this kind of unprecedented embrace of outright, authoritarianism. So I would say authoritarian playbook. Others might say treason. But really, it is important to understand that this is a plan that's unique from other kind of policy agendas that we've seen. And because it's got all these unpopular policy ideas that they've long supported, they have to figure out a new plan to actually get them enacted. And that's where Project 2025's embrace of the authoritarianism and gutting of our system of checks and balances really comes in. And when you look at kind of heritage policy platforms from the past, they've been doing this ever since Ronald Reagan first ran. About 2/3 or so of the policy ideas in their policy agendas ultimately end up actually getting enacted. In Donald Trump's first term, 64% of Heritage's policy recommendations were moved on in his first year in office. But finally, it's also important to understand that a lot of the ideas in Project 2025 are already getting enacted in states under MAGA control. So these ideas aren't necessarily hypothetical. They aren't existing as just some academics, fever dream, but really are informing, the agenda of MAGA extremists when they actually have power. Next slide, please. So I talked about this gutting of our system of checks and balances, and we did a bunch of message testing back in May, and this is actually the defining feature of Project 2025 that people were most concerned about. So, as you are, as you are talking to your friends, talking to your family, your colleagues, and trying to educate them about Project 2025, this is kind of a core feature that I'd really encourage you to share more information about. So there's a range of different ways that Project 2025 seeks to gut our system of checks and balances, but I'll just spotlight a few. Mentioned this replacing of the civil servants. Up to 50,000 civil servants could be replaced with political loyalists. They do this through a thing called Schedule F, where career civil servants would have their jobs reclassified as Schedule F positions, stripping them of their civil service labor protections and allowing the president to then fire them and replace them with political loyalists, because these jobs would go from civil service positions to political appointees. Right now, there's about 4,000 political appointees in the federal government, so we're talking about massively scaling that up to the tune of about 10 times. Why is that important? Because these are folks who, are medical experts at the FDA, are climate scientists at the EPA. And really, you could see kind of a massive infiltration of not just special interests, but, cronyism more broadly. Weave its way into the very fabric of our government. And really, this is, we used to have a lot more political appointees, and cronyism was terrible. And that's part of the reason why more of these civil service protections were put into place to begin with. So really, they're talking about bringing that back. They also want to eliminate longstanding independence of key federal agencies. I'm sure you've heard a lot about the talk of weaponizing the Department of Justice, but it's not just DOJ. They want to strip the FTC of its independence, the Federal Reserve, bringing the powers of these agencies in direct control of the president. Project 2025's key architect, Russ Vought, and Trump have both voiced support for illegally using impoundment power to bypass congressionally appropriated laws that Congress passes to appropriate funds. They could do this to, say, weaponize policy against, say, states that vote for Kamala Harris rather than Donald Trump, or maybe have a law in the books protecting abortion rights that a Trump administration does not agree with, what have you. So there's a number of different ways that can manifest itself, but the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly that impoundment is illegal, and yet quite concerningly, I think whether it's impoundment or a number of these different efforts, I think Americans are rightly concerned that the Supreme Court is not going to be a reliable backstop given its extreme far-right majority, having basically blessed in its presidential immunity ruling a couple months back that anything the president does in an official capacity cannot be held criminally liable for. In addition to impoundment, the plan calls for weakening the independence of the media and news reporting by allowing the president to manipulate the powers of the FCC. Notably after the ABC News presidential debate a few weeks back, Donald Trump the next day called for stripping ABC of its licenses. So again, while Trump is trying to distance himself from Project 2025, there is just this constant synergy we're seeing between the ideas laid out in the plan and the very words coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. Finally, Project 2025 calls for basically exploiting and misusing the Insurrection Act to try to stifle protest of a far-right president's administration. Next slide, please. But getting beyond kind of this gutting of the system of checks and balances, the real kind of core three things that they want to do, or two things really, is harming the middle class and pulling the rug out from under working people, and two, really stripping away our rights and freedoms. And again, it's important, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court, that really, it's more dangerous than ever that we could see some of these kind of thought of as, legally, tenuous at best, may see their way into actually getting upheld by the far right court, just as we saw with abortion rights or affirmative action. Our rights and freedoms can ultimately fall and be stripped away, and power can be consolidated in the hands of a all-powerful president, of corporations who want to have more control over their workers, over their consumers. All of that really is at stake in Project 2025. Next slide. But to walk through kind of a few key policy issues, I just wanted to spend a little time talking through some of the most high-profile things that really matter to people, either because they're personal freedoms or they affect their pocketbook. I did want to talk about taxes. So Project 2025 calls for consolidating individual income tax brackets into a two-rate system, one at 15, one at 30%. So folks up at the top who are paying at a 37% rate would immediately see their taxes cut. They would then be paying at a 30% rate. Folks who, the bottom 45% of income earners in this country are paying at 10 or 12%. They would immediately see a tax increase under this plan. We run the numbers at CAP. We found that the typical family would pay about $3,000 more a year under this plan, even as the richest 45,000 households would get an average annual tax cut of $1.5 million. But that is just the first piece of Project 2025's tax plan. Ultimately, what they want to do is replace all income and corporate taxes with a consumption tax. This is basically a national sales tax. Only the top 10% of earners would actually receive would have more after-tax income. The bottom 80% of earners would pay between 6 and 28% more under such a scheme. Next slide. In terms of Social Security, so Project 2025's authors have publicly supported and endorsed plans that seek to raise the retirement age. These are reflected in the two most recent Republican Study Committee budgets that call for increasing the Social Security retirement age, full retirement age, from 67 to 69. Doing so would cut Social Security benefits for about 3 in 4 Americans, or 245 million people in this country. And what would it mean for folks' pocketbook? Depending on when you actually end up drawing down Social Security, you could see about a $46,000 to $100,000 loss in benefits over the course of a 10-year period. This is particularly harmful for women who live longer and need to be able to draw down their retirement benefits over a longer period of time. Of course, also lower lifetime earnings lead to lower retirement wealth built up over time, and therefore a greater reliance on Social Security. So again, these plans are really a direct assault on women. Next slide. But we can't talk about Project 2025 and not also talk about its impact on caregivers. Really, whether you're caring for children, whether you're caring for an aging parent, or a family member with disabilities, really Project 2025 would be a complete nightmare. Right now, roughly 30 million kids and nearly 20 million seniors and non-elderly people with disabilities rely on Medicaid for their healthcare needs. And that includes long-term services and supports like home and community-based care. And these are, of course, some of the most expensive benefits that Medicaid covers. And Project 2025, like we saw in the Republican ACA repeal efforts from 2017, calls for imposing a per capita cap or a block grant for the program that is explicitly tied to a specific dollar amount. It doesn't actually reflect what states are actually spending on providing care to Medicaid enrollees. So you could see, say, in the event of a pandemic, right? Not that this could ever happen, but states having to absorb a lot more healthcare costs than they otherwise might have, being left high and dry, and forced to make impossible decisions if they don't have the money to cover the cost of those additional services being sought by Medicaid beneficiaries by having to restrict what benefits Medicaid is actually going to cover. It specifically entitles state Medicaid programs to terminate specific benefits, and giving them the option to do so that they're not currently federally allowed to. It could also force states to cut Medicaid reimbursement rates, which could put patients' access to particular doctors or hospitals at risk. And then finally, it could also lead to people losing their Medicaid coverage if a state's not able to continue to finance enrollment for all of its current beneficiaries. In addition to that, the plan completely eliminates the Head Start program. Head Start provides free preschool and childcare to about 833,000 families all across the country. The plan completely eliminates it, meaning that the typical family would have to come up with about $12,000 on average for toddler childcare if they were going to be able to find a childcare option. Then again, already a majority of people are living in childcare deserts in this country. You completely wipe out Head Start, it's going to make it that much harder for people to get a slot. And that could only drive up demand more, which could increase the cost of tuition. So, really, these kind of policy interventions don't just affect people, who benefit from Head Start, but really could dismantle the whole childcare system in the United States. And then finally, there's a whole bunch of caregiving responsibilities that women are shouldering the bulk of in doing things like, providing meals for their school-age children, could be completely taken away. Right now, there's about 20 million students who are currently eligible for free school meals because they are eligible through what's called the community eligibility provision, which allows all students who attend schools where a certain percentage of the student body qualify for free or reduced price meals, could see that eligibility completely terminated because of Project 2025's provisions. Next slide. Turning the page from the economy to our rights and freedoms, the attacks on reproductive freedom in particular are overwhelming, ranging from everything like effectuating a backdoor national abortion ban by misapplying the Comstock Act and instructing the FDA to overturn approval of medication abortion. This is something that could be done, like I mentioned earlier, by installing political appointees in traditionally civil service positions that are expert civil servants, right? You could see a political crony being thrust into the FDA and making kind of political decisions about what sort of medications are safe and effective. This could make it not just impossible to receive medication abortion in states where where abortion is banned, but also, could deny access to abortion care to the tens of millions of American women who live in states that protect reproductive freedom, because the drug makers of mifepristone, misoprostol, might find that it's impossible to actually get their products to market, or people who have ordered medication abortion may not be able to get their medication if a Trump lackey at the U.S. Postal Service is rummaging through your mail. In addition to the attacks on medication abortion, the plan also calls for the CDC to enhance abortion surveillance and pregnancy surveillance, including monitoring the number of abortions provided, the state of pregnancy, pregnant women's state of residence, and method of termination. The plan also calls on Congress to declare that life begins at conception, which could not just make abortion criminalized, but it could also make it practically impossible to receive certain types of fertility treatments like IVF. The plan calls for ending all federal funding for Planned Parenthood, and also eliminates the no-cost preventive care provisions for emergency contraception that more than 45 million women in the country are currently benefiting from. Next slide. The plan also makes it easier for employers in schools to discriminate on the basis of sex. It does so by making it more difficult for people to bring civil rights cases and have those challenges heard. In the case of employers, basically it really kind of rolls back the clock to an earlier era where people could be discriminated on the basis of pregnancy, on the basis of gender, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, and it does so by making it harder for the EEOC to track complaints that are brought citing civil rights violations, and really neuter the enforcement capacity of the EEOC by making it pretty much impossible for them to enter into consent decrees with employers, which is really the primary enforcement mechanism of EEOC when they become aware of civil rights violations. Finally, the plan also turns back the clock on Title IX, reinstating the DeVos-era Title IX rules. Doing so would roll back protections from sexual harassment and assault by increasing the burden of proof on complainants and exposing them to live hearings, cross-examination, including from their alleged abusers, which is outrageous and I think just completely grotesque that somebody who could face a violation of their own body could be forced to have to come face to face with their own abuser is wicked. It also makes it more likely, because of this new system, that you'd see more complaints not actually being brought as incidents occur, because people feel like they're going to be subjected to a adjudication process that they don't want to have to endure. And then finally, the plan calls for eliminating protections for LGBTQI plus people, explicitly calls for eliminating the consideration of gender identity as it relates to civil rights violations, instructs the administration to not defend the Bostock decision, which was crucial for clarifying that gender identity is a protected class. So really, it's a wholesale assault on our civil rights and our rights and freedoms as it relates to both employment, schools, and public accommodations more broadly. Realize I threw a lot out there, but wanted to give you some quick highlights. Happy to answer any questions now. If you have more questions as you're digesting this, my email is at the bottom and you're welcome to drop me a line.
Colin, there is one question about, do you have an idea of how many federal employees there are, civil servants there are in the Washington metro area versus everywhere else? The fear is that people may just think this is going to only affect workers in Washington, DC. I guess it's notable that there's obviously a lot of federal employees that are abroad. So do you have any notion about the numbers there?
To be clear, I mean, the overwhelming majority of people who probably would be seeing their positions terminated live in the DC metro area and work in the DC metro area. But of course, you know, like you say, there are federal government positions, civil service positions all over the world, not to mention just all over the country. That said, you know, Kathy, I think I thank you for your question. I would say that, you know, we have seen in testing, not just the testing that we have done, but in survey after survey after survey after survey, it really surprised us because we thought, you know, most people would just see these folks as like government bureaucrats, right? And they don't like them, right? Or they think that they're actually a problem, not actually somebody who's there working on their behalf. But that actually is not what we found whatsoever. And people understand that there are experts who are really meant to be independent of politics, who are there to serve the public interest, not the interest of one particular president, as Project 2025 really proposes.
I should also note that there are many organizations that have pulled out the information on other consequences of importance to different constituencies. And for folks who want to do more research, we can send out to the sign-up list some of those better compilations of how various groups, especially women, would be impacted, and we'll get that sent out soon. Any other questions of Colin or Alice?
I don't have a question. This is Ann. I'll just say that I'm even more frightened than I was before this presentation. 43 days, 42 days to go. This has got to get out to, I mean, it's devastating to our whole way of life.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know what the plans are for getting it in every single mailbox, but I just see this 2025 as a complete elimination of our way of life. So
if I can, thank you, Ann. I will flag the Center for American Progress has produced fact sheets for all 50 states, including some of them that are in Spanish. So please check out that link and share it with your network, share it with your family and friends and whatnot so they can learn more state-specific information on Project 2025.
that's great. Thank you.
I don't know if you can answer, but I'd like to know that if they're seeing we already have an equal rights amendment fully ratified, and I don't understand what's higher than Article 5 of the US Constitution, how that might impact preventing some of this if we can get it recognized and certified and published. Do you know anything about that?
I am not the lawyer, so I'm gonna defer to Alice.
Okay.
If he has any thoughts, but or anybody else on the call. But
I mean, I know that in states like Connecticut, New Mexico, Nevada, they've been using it to try to preserve rights and give a basis for laws to be enforced.
Yeah, I guess I would just reinforce that, we've got a Supreme Court that basically says the president can do whatever they want.
Yeah. So the current president could do whatever he wants and tell the archivist to hurry up and certify it in public. There should be no repercussion for that. I mean, it is his job to see that statutes are followed. And then the American Bar Association came out in early August saying that the current situation is unconstitutional and that it should be recognized as Amendment 28 of the US Constitution. It was ratified 4 years ago, went into effect 2 years ago, supposedly. But yeah, our US Supreme Court has ignored it, or they probably wouldn't have been able to do the extent of dots.
Right. Do we have any other questions or comments about the elections?
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
Okay, what is the rationale between cutting out school lunches, for example? I mean, it's really a very mean project, shall we say. Why are they doing this? I mean, is it just money? Is it just, I know in terms of women, unfortunately, I'm with Brooklyn Queens now, but this attack on children and childcare.
Yeah, I mean, they don't think that the federal government should be involved in basically doing much of anything for people. And that is really a through line in much of what Project 2025 proposes. They think, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and all's going to be okay in the world. But I think it's really important to remember, who's most impacted by this kind of ideological approach. It's not just low-income people, it's also women, it's also people of color, it's also, first-generation Americans, who traditionally have less wealth and fewer access to resources to be able to be socially mobile. And that's really exactly who there's a bullseye put on the back of. So in this plan.
Thank you so much, Colin and Alice. We do have a hard close
Me too.
at 1 o'clock. So
Thank you all.
we are very thankful to get all of this information, especially with the election just around the corner. And we need to let our neighbors know the threat that Project 2025 holds for the rest of for all of the country. So this has been a great program, and thank you so much to our speakers and to Kathy, who helped organize it, and all of our technical crew. And we are going to have another great program in October, and we'll get that information out soon, and it will be about the importance of electing feminists. And welcome anybody who's got any suggestions or ideas for speakers. They can email Sue Klein at feminist.org or me at govtrel@now.org, Jan Erickson. And we'll wait to see you at the end of October. Well, October 22nd, is it, Sue, that we're going to hold it? Okay, great. All right, thanks so much, everybody.